Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate your support, your participation in this show and these conversations we're having. Really excited today to be welcoming to the show, or back to the show rather, Lieutenant Colonel David Kelly. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to be with us.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
This is really exciting. So this is your second time on the show. For those who are longtime listeners, you will remember Lieutenant Colonel Kelly from his interview when we talked about his first book, Hell on the Streets of Huseba, which was just masterfully done, taking basically the firsthand accounts of those Marines who were in Huseba. And for those history buffs out there, and maybe for those who don't know, um, part of Lieutenant Colonel Kelly's book chronicles the actions of Corporal Dunham, who received the Medal of Honor for his valor there in Huseba. But this current book, and the reason why you're on the show, is called First Fights in Fallujah, Marines During Operation Vigilant Resolve in Iraq in April 2004. Sir, again, just really wonderfully crafted, and I definitely want to talk about some of your thoughts going into the book, how it had links to your previous book. But I think one of the things for our listeners who maybe didn't catch you the first time, if you could just sort of bring us up to speed on sort of who you are, well, not necessarily who you are, but what it was that you did, or what it is that you do for the Marine Corps that sort of ties in all these books, and how are you able to get all of these firsthand accounts?
Uh, Great, Vic. Well, I my last 4 years in the reserves, 95 to 99, I was with the History and Museums Division, which at that time was at Washington, D.C. It's since moved to Quantico, and retired in 1999. Did some active duty in San Diego the next summer, and then I was on my way to look forward to my reserve retirement. 2003, I met up with History and Museums Division Marine Corps birthday dinner, and my old OIC, Colonel Nick Reynolds. We had a conversation, and I reminded him that until I was collecting a pension, I was still able to go back on active duty. And he laughed, said, "Yeah, we'll call you if we need you." And the next month he called me because 2003, the 10 or 12 field historians at the division had all been activated for the initial invasion of Iraq, and they could not be extended on active duty any longer. So I was in a position. He asked me if I considered doing it, going over there to Iraq in 2004. Now at the time things were quiet when he told me this, and when I had the conversations with my wife. But it's pretty much like what I found in the book and in my research. I was a Marine. I was trained to do something the last 4 years of my service, and never actually got to do it in a real situation. And here was an opportunity to actually go into an area and meet with Marines and interview Marines and do the field history. One of the misunderstandings with field history, even for active duty Marines, is they think that we're going to write history. Field historians are just there to record what Marines are telling them. We're not there to do unit histories. We're not there to do anything like that. It's just to get these feelings down and then have it on file so that future historians can use it. So that was the background of what I did, the opportunity that I had. And then over the years, after my return to civilian life, after my 6 months on active duty, I began going through the interviews myself and going over my notes and going over my field history journals and started to put it together in some kind of a form. And that led to the first book. And then in organizing that, I looked at, here's another way to organize things. But that's kind of the background of the field history and what I was doing at the time.
And a little bit of history of your own. You started off in service during the Vietnam War, correct?
Right. Yeah, I found it interesting because when I was back on active duty in 2006, and I had these a Vietnamese service medal ribbon, and people looking at me, and I can remember when I was a lieutenant looking at guys who had the Korean War ribbons,
Yeah.
thinking how old they were. And so I said, well, I'm that guy that now. I'm that old guy that was from the prehistoric war. again, I was off the coast of Vietnam. I never went in country, but from being off the coast on an amphibious readiness group, um, we were awarded the Vietnamese Service Medal, Vietnamese Service Ribbon.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. It's so cool. I could
Yeah.
probably spend the entire interview just talking about the dynamics there. But so if I understand the chronology correctly, this book is actually your first um, time in the role of collecting and collating this history, correct? Whereas Huseba, those accounts came after your time in Fallujah. Is that correct?
Right, yeah. Huseba, the way things evolved over there, I was based out of Camp Fallujah, and then it was up to me and Major John Piedmont, the other field historian, to get to different units and to interview as many Marines as we could. Yeah, the Huseba interviews, I did them in, I guess it was June and July of 2004. The Fallujah ones were mostly in April, May, and June. So it was easier to get a short book out first. And then once that got published, the publisher decided with me that there were more stories to tell. And that's why this Fallujah book has a lot more. But yeah, it's kind of a backward chronology. The Huseba story is actually about events that took place after Fallujah.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, they took place around the same time, but I met the Marines well after I met the Marines from Fallujah.
Right, right, right. And so in this book, then, as you started off, um, you go into a little more detail on sort of your journey, if you will, to Camp Fallujah. Can you talk a
Right.
little bit about that and sort of that sort of eye-opening experience?
Yeah, we because we weren't deploying as a big unit. It was myself well, actually at that time it was just myself traveling with a few other Marines from Quantico. Um, Commercial flight into Kuwait, waiting for the flight from Kuwait into Baghdad. In Baghdad, waiting for a helicopter flight into Camp Fallujah, and that was in April of 2004 when things were really blowing up. So the year before that, people had been able to get in a couple of Humvees and travel where they needed to travel. The time I got there, it was you traveled at night, you traveled by helo, and you had to wait until you could get that connection to go there. So it took probably about a week from the time I left the States till I actually got my feet on the ground in Camp Fallujah.
Yeah, and hearing your accounts and sort of how you recalled sort of maneuvering the battle space really reminded me a lot of my time of this hurry up and wait, like don't unpack, don't get too comfortable, and then especially the type of transportation, it's hook or by crook, right? Like you're taking helos, fixed wings, ground transpo, like whatever, basically, because you're not necessarily slated on the
Correct.
yeah. So you're kind of space A around the battlefield.
Pretty much. That's true. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. I've spent even as part of a unit that's supposed to go, you spend a lot of time in those things just waiting for something to show up and hopefully you don't get bumped.
Yeah, and even once I got there and I started discovering how to get to places and contact people. I'd contact the unit, I'd contact the XO or the OPSO, and I'm going to try to get there next week. And I'd show up at a place, and who are you? Well, I'm the guy that contacted you, and you said you have guys for me. Well, they're all out today. They're not in. So I, cool my heels for a while until people were available. And then sometimes I get to a place and they have 10 guys sitting in a room waiting for me to interview.
Yeah.
More than I could
Yeah.
handle at any one time. So yeah, it
Yeah.
was flexible at all times.
Yeah, yeah. Semper Gumby, right?
Some Gumby, that's true. Yes.
Um, so yeah, so talking about this book, First Fights in Fallujah, I'm sort of noticing a bit of a theme, at least with these two books, um, and which makes me wonder what it was about these accounts and this action in particular that made you want to have it published. When we talked about Hell on the Streets of Huseba, you expressed part of your impetus behind that book, and other than sort of the ease of getting a shorter narrative out, is that Husseba in a lot of ways had gotten overshadowed by the events of Fallujah,
Right.
and you wanted to ensure that this that those the actions of those Marines, the heroism, the camaraderie, that warrior ethos that was exhibited there wasn't sort of lost to history just because
Right.
of its proximity in time. Here, I think in this book we see a very similar thing, whereas everyone remembers uh, Phantom Fury, but
Right.
Vigilant Resolve sort of, in a lot of ways, was I don't know, the battle that, for the Marines there, obviously, it was the battle that should have been completed but wasn't. But
Right.
for those who only either vaguely remembered or only reading it through these books, it was kind of the battle that we lost. Can you talk a little bit about some of your impetus behind putting this book out?
Yeah, well, the Marines that I talked to and the Marines that I met and the things that I read while I was there, I mean, they all felt they were within days or weeks of just taking over the town. There was so much, I guess, it was the information operations of the enemy that were so masterful with the foreign press. I mean, every time we'd read something, it would be about women and children being killed.
Yeah.
When I talked to these Marines, they were not coming across women and children in these buildings. But they realized that, okay, there's a political situation. We have to follow what they tell us to do. There was frustration, but there was an understanding, even at the lance corporal level. They thought, we went in there, we kicked ass, we did our job. Now our job is to stand back and let these Iraqis try to take over and settle things. So there was frustration, but a maturity that surprised me, especially among the younger Marines, about what was happening and the sacrifices that they had made. And when I left in August, they were hopeful that things would improve. No, they didn't. And then when the Marines went in the second time, there was no second guessing, no thoughts. It was just in November they were going to do what had to be done. Um, but yeah, the early fighting is kind of overshadowed. In fact, books I read about Fallujah all talk about the November fight and not a whole lot about the April fight. Again, the April fight had gone on for another week or two. There wouldn't have been a November.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
time knew that. Um,
Yeah, I after the invasion, I had made some drug deals to stay with Third Tracks to participate in the invasion. And that sentiment was very much the same when I left, was like, hey, mission accomplished, right? Like President Bush on the aircraft carrier, here we are. We're the guys with the combat action ribbons, and because of my drug deal, I go off on recruiting duty. Everything, like you said, the press is just all over the brutality of everything that's going on. I get back to the fleet in 2006, and their first first tour Marines with racks 3 high, and I'm sitting there, with the NAM and the combat action ribbon. Um,
uh-huh.
but yeah, very much talking to those Marines who were there, going back again, it was very much that sentiment that, like, we were on the cusp, like you said, like, you could quite
Right,
literally see the finish line, and then we were told to stop.
right,
And sort of the political climate at the time, I guess, is somewhat even analogous today, where, hey, this thing happened. The Blackwater contractors were, brutally murdered, um, out for display. We have to
mhm,
respond, and then it's like, oh shit, your response is pretty gnarly, and it's like, what did you think was going to happen? And then, like you said, that the information campaign from Al Qaeda in Iraq was really was a generation ahead of where we were
right.
um,
Mhm,
in controlling that narrative, and they definitely won that aspect of the pillars of warfare, and
right.
so, but so did you find then, because you'd said, the the bookshelves, if that even is a thing anymore, were really just full of s stories and narratives, of Marines in the November fight.
Right.
But did you find then when you were submitting this book that there were some pushback on like, well, why would we wanna chronicle the accounts of the battle that we lost? Or even, I didn't even know there was a Fallujah one. What
Right.
was the reception like when you were pitching this idea?
Well, probably 4 or 5 publishers. I just got the letter back that said we're not interested in this at this time. Finally, I did get the one publisher who actually turned out to be the agent and a publisher in the United Kingdom, is the actual publisher of the book. But um, yeah, one of the things that that frustrated me, even in books that did mention First Fallujah, like I was at a Marine Corps birthday dinner last month, and Colonel Dick Camp was there, and I chatted with him a little bit, and I said, sir, there's a story in your book about Iraq, about Fallujah, that's a half a page, and I said it's 2 chapters in my book, the same event, and he laughed and he said, that's how it had to be. I had to summarize everything there, and the other frustration in reading books like Dick Camp's book, which was great, is interviews were done with the same Marines, some of the same Marines who I met, but it would be a phone interview done in 2008. And, I said,
Mm,
Corporal a week after the event happened, and he was telling it to
yeah,
me like it was a movie. And I felt there wasn't any of that. Any of the interviews that I did, none of them were used. That was part of my impetus to get this into print and get it out there. There were a couple of books I've read, and they would do the official report or the commendation report that would be quoted in the book, and it's written in a certain type of language. It's not a corporal saying, "Holy shit, we just got overrun and the stuff was happening," and it's at great risk to his own life. Corporal Jones that made this decision. That's the legalese. The interviews that I did was these are the words of the guys. They're not being refashioned for an award. It's
yeah.
their actual feelings. It's actually what happened. It might take 4 pages in the book to tell this story that he's telling me, and for an after action report, it's got to be summarized in a couple of paragraphs in a
Sure.
certain format. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really, one of the things I really enjoyed about the book was some of the anecdotal, which you're not gonna
Hmm.
get years later over a very sterile sort of like, "Well, hey, tell me what happened." This
Right.
is very raw. These are very raw accounts, and I like, for example, I'm drawing a blank on which Marine it was that you'd interviewed, but was known for saying that like mortars don't strike the same place twice.
Right. Right.
And then he gets
Uh-huh.
hit on the roof twice, and then his account is, "Well, it must have been a rocket then because mortars still don't hit." Like, Marines are never wrong, man. We are never
Right.
wrong.
Right.
Um, or the tanker, who had said, "Hey, there's something else going on here other than this jihadist zeal," because there was an insurgent who was firing an AK at this main battle tank, and they
Right.
had literally
Mhm.
pointed their main gun at him, and he
Yeah.
just kept
Uh-huh.
going. It's
Uh-huh.
like, "God, these guys must be on drugs because that was insane."
You're
Um,
right.
yeah, you're not going to see that in an after action report. So yeah, this is
Now,
it definitely resonates. I think even beyond, um, for those who were there, because especially as we're talking, and especially looking back now on the Long War, as we're, I guess officially, unofficially, not doing these type of combat operations. Um, there is this tendency to sort of, in our collective consciousness, to just merge everything all together. Like, oh,
right.
I was in Fallujah, like, great, and then everyone thinks of, whatever it is they think of as Fallujah, but there's no longer that individual is, I guess individual is the right word, but that idea that these things happened to Marines sometimes multiple times, but this time happened at this time, this thing happened at this time, and that's important that we don't lose the
Mhm.
context.
true.
Yeah. Um,
Well,
well, what
even in,
about, oh, go ahead, please.
just saying, the books that tell the big story, they have to tell the big story. Uh, my two books don't tell the big story; they tell the individual stories. And one of the things that even when I was putting it together and then revising it, I thought this is giving me a picture that I didn't see at the time. I was so close to it that I didn't see some of these things until I stepped back years later and saw the connection between a lot of these different stories. I mean, oftentimes I'd be just taking notes doing a story and not really listening because I was busy um, recording everything and being careful that I didn't miss anything that he said. It was really later, reading through my notes, reading through my journals, and then listening to the Marines and then summarizing what they said. That's where I was able to form a better picture, and then organizing that into a book and deciding which Marines I would include in the book. For instance, there's a Marine gunnery sergeant with the Amtrak company. Great interview, but it wasn't a combat interview. So that I
Mm.
thought, okay, that I'm going to leave out for the general reader. Now, to a Marine, that might mean a whole lot. Like, wow, how did this gunny handle operating this company out here in the middle of nowhere, keeping the vehicles up, getting parts in, things like that. But for the average reader, and even for a lot of Marine readers, they want to see the nuts and bolts of the front end of the combat. Same thing with aviation. There were a couple of aviation interviews I did that were really, down to the nuts and bolts of keeping the helicopters up in the air and repairing them and everything. But they weren't involved in combat actions. So some of them I just, made a decision to leave them out. So that was what led to the 50 or so interviews that I did include in the book. And even then, there were a couple stories that were the guys just didn't talk a whole lot.
Yeah.
And okay, it's a page. This guy's important. He's a corporal squad leader, but and he was involved in some stuff, but he doesn't talk a whole lot about it. And he wasn't holding anything back. Just not a very vocal person. And other interviews, I'd be there for some interviews with an hour and a half. I just sat there listening and taking notes. Yeah, trying to absorb it all. And I didn't stop them. I asked very few questions. In fact, later on when I was listening to the interviews, I thought, I should have asked them this. I should have asked them that. But I felt just by letting them go, sometimes you'd get some real nuggets of information from them. And that was true in so many cases.
Yeah, and we had talked about this a little bit in when we were talking about Hell in the Streets of Huseba. I always found it really fascinating because, especially, unless you're like giving feeding Marines the liquid truth serum, the truth serum, that a lot of times you just sort of get I just did my job.
Yeah.
But let me tell you about this other guy, or oh yeah, it was gnarly. And that's the extent of it. So I always found it really fascinating, how in sort of a short time, um, you get, like you said, sometimes you would show up to a location and there'd be 10 Marines sitting in a room.
Yeah.
A lot of them, probably 80% of them are sitting there shitting their pants like, oh my God, am I under investigation?
But that was the thing that I would have to break through at the beginning. Say, look, I'm a high school history teacher. I'm a reservist. I just want to hear your story. This is not an investigation. Tell me what you can tell me. And at the higher levels, like company and battalion, it was, I can't handle anything classified, because that would have been a whole nother issue, trying to transport that stuff around if I'd got
Sure.
anything classified. Even photographs that I took, if I was in the battalion headquarters or regimental headquarters, I didn't take any pictures of anything, even though it would be interesting to put into a book. I wasn't thinking of a book at the time, but I don't want to get involved in that that whole situation. So yeah, it was breaking through this is not an investigation. This is just, we're recording this. A couple times in the Huseba book, I mentioned it, where Marines would ask me, sir, what's going to happen with this interview? And, I'd give them basically it's going to be in storage. Someday in the future, some historian might come across it and use it. That's what it's for. Again, part of me writing the book is nobody came across these interviews and nobody used them. So I thought, well, I'm going to use them.
Yeah, that's really cool. And so that actually leads me into one of my questions. I don't think we touched on this with your previous book, but one of the things I really enjoy about reading these narratives is that you start off with a brief history of the Marine and their background, how they came to, be in the unit, how they came to be in the Marine Corps. Is that is that sort of SOP within History Division, or is that just something you were doing to sort of help lower some of those defenses and break some of that stuff down?
Yeah, it was more of the latter. It was more of just tell me a little bit about yourself, why you entered the Marines, what were you expecting? Um, we were required to get background on the Marines, but by starting the interview that way, that kind of opened the Marine up more, I thought. The motivations for joining and what they expected to do, and maybe some events at boot camp. And then some of them were on previous deployments. There were a number of Marines who had been in the initial invasion in 2003. In fact, one of the corporals, he said, who was interesting, when they went into Iraq in 2004, they said it was the same day, it was the same hour that they crossed the border from Fallujah, or from Kuwait into Iraq. Although the year earlier there were bombs falling and helicopters flying in the air and jets flying overhead, but they pointed out how ironic it was that they were back on the same roads in the same places a year later. And then some of them wanted to talk about their experiences the year before, and I let them go. Give them a whole different perspective, and then it would get into the current events. And I would never say, "Do you have anything really exciting to tell me?" It would just tell me what happened. What did you do? And kind of let them lead the path. I think if I'd asked the hard hitting type questions at the beginning, I wouldn't have gotten the responses that I got. They'd be
it probably would have come off like you were doing an investigation,
right? Or I'm doing a combat report, or writing up a commendation for a medal or something like that, and they're
right.
I know how that has to sound. So mine were, no, these are not that at all. This is just tell me what happened.
Well, I think it's an interesting choice, and one that didn't necessarily come through to me until I saw again the style choice again in this book is that how much of sort of it really speaks to the humanity of the Marines, that these aren't, they aren't just these robots, break glass in time of war, that these are real people with real issues that come from all, just a whole menagerie of backgrounds and upbringings and experiences that led them to this thing. And so I thought it really it added a lot of I guess texture, but also a lot of humanity to what's going on.
Yeah, there was one corporal, I can't think of his name, but he was talking about they're clearing rooms in this apartment building, and they're getting grenades thrown at them, and they're shooting at people. And then he kicks open a door, and there's a couple of women and a little girl the same age as his little girl there that he didn't shoot at. And how that affected him afterwards. He said, there was this little girl the same as my little girl. It made me think about my little girl. And yeah, you're right about the humanity that, 5 minutes ago they were shooting at somebody who was shooting at them in the same building, and they didn't know what was behind that door when they kicked it open. And yet they had enough presence of mind to stop what they were doing and realize, okay, these are innocent civilians that we're faced with right now, and all we have to do now is calm them down and then go about our business in the same building.
Yeah. No, yeah, the those sorts of decisions, and I have always said that, from my time, in like, I've never been more impressed with the emerging generation of Americans than when I saw these Marines doing the things that they did at a level that, like, it's literally mind blowing. I guess not literally mind blowing, but quite literally. It's mind blowing to just think about all of the things that they've had to navigate through and the decisions they've had to make, like within split seconds, and just the level of just depth and how dynamic each of these Marines were. I just it almost brings me to tears when I think about, like, just how amazing they are at their age. I joke, but it's real. Like, when I was their age, the hardest decision I had to make was, do I go to class or do I keep drinking? And so I've just never been more impressed, and it definitely comes through on the page here in your book. So I really appreciate that.
Well, I gave a short talk. There was a parade a year after I got back. They asked me to be in a parade in the town where I was teaching, and they asked me to give a few remarks at this memorial service. And I probably offended a few of the old guys there. No, I'm an old guy now, but I mean old, like Korea War vet guys and a few World War II vet guys, because this is 17 years ago. And I said, people talk about the greatest generation in World War II. I said, I saw the greatest generation, and they're the Marines are in Iraq right now. And same as you, I was just totally impressed by the maturity of these young men and what they were doing. And sometimes people said to me, how come there's no women in the book? And my answer is there weren't any women in the infantry back in 2004. Right. I interviewed the people who I've met with. Now, I did interview some female Marines in aviation units and some female corpsmen and some other people that were motor transport people, but the operators out in the field, those are the guys, those are the men. Even when I met with General Mattis at one point, he didn't want to be interviewed, but he did meet with me. We found out we had been at the basic school around the same time. And, he stayed in and became a general. I maxed out at lieutenant colonel, but it's it kind of alluded to the fact that sometimes when he was giving his reports about combat casualties, somebody somewhere was urging him to say the men and women who have been killed in combat. And he basically said there haven't been any women killed in combat at that time.
Right.
Since then, there were some, but he said, no, these are the casualties this month were, whatever the number was of Marines, and they were all male. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but that was my story. Yeah.
It's a thing. Again, I think this is where we conflate these battles and why it's so important that we're chronicling them within the context that they happen, because I think if my understanding is correct, they did have the female engagement teams in the November fight.
Right.
But they did not
in the April. No.
Right. And so it's important that we're understanding that these things happen when they happened, and the context in which they were happening. Well, to just shift gears really quick, to make a shameless plug for my Amtrak brethren, completely completely unbiased opinion here, of course, but the fact that chapter 2 is titled Marine Tankers and Trackers, I was like, oh, finally. But yeah, we talked a little bit in the pre-show how really rewarding it was for me personally to read, because as I'm looking through the names, I'm like, oh, Ben Venning, like very close friend of mine. Oh,
okay.
Sergeant Alcantar, who was like one of my crew chiefs when I had 2nd Platoon Alpha Company. Like, it was so great. And it was really, I don't know if cathartic is the word, but it really helped me see more about them, because as our listeners know, who wear the uniform or have worn, a lot of times you make these really great relationships, these really deep bonds, but then we PCS, we go off,
right.
We deploy, we do these things, and then you only sort of hear through second and third person contacts about how, or maybe you run into someone in the PX 8 years later, and you're like, I really gotta go, man, but like I really want to hang out too. And you never really get to see or hear about their experiences, only tangentially through other relationships. And Alcantar in particular, he was he ended up going on recruiting duty, doing great things. And I'd known that he'd gotten wounded in Fallujah, but to hear his account of what had actually happened, it's something that I probably wouldn't have gotten, because it wouldn't have been in official capacity. I would have gotten well, if you give me another beer, maybe I'll tell you. I bring him a beer and he says, yeah, it sucked, and so I feel like I got to see an aspect of him that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And so I really did appreciate that. But it also was great to see, and maybe we could talk a little bit about how those stories, because as you're collecting those stories, then you go off and talk to, a CAT team leader who was in the same vicinity, or the QRF OIC who responded to some of this stuff. And like, can we talk about how, as you're going through these things, you started to see that there were all of it's like what you thought you were going to be looking at a window now becomes a prism of all of these different things.
Yeah, it was the stories kind of, a lot of them fall together, and I've given talks at libraries, local libraries, and things like that. And sometimes people say, "Well, didn't they know the guy in the tank? Didn't they know the guy in the vehicle?" And I'd say, "No. That this Amtrak shows up one day, and the driver says, 'All right, we're assigned to you. We're taking you here,' and you get off the Amtrak, and then that's it. You'll never see that guy again. You'll never know what actions he took." And I felt that was one of the interesting things with putting some of these stories together, that you could see how they're all part of the same story, but they don't know each other. They're not in the same unit, or they're attached for a week and then they go somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's almost, I think for those of us who ingest a ton of popular media, you see a lot of this in like the Guy Ritchie sort of stuff or the Tarantino things. But it's a real thing. It's a real aspect of life is that, yeah, for the individual Marine, it was, sort of, a flash of the pan connection, but there's a lot of, inner workings that are going on here. And I think it's really cool how, and so was that a stylistic choice then as you were putting these things together?
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. It was, telling the stories. And then, couple years ago, I was contacted by somebody at the Marine Corps Gazette about putting together like a narrative of the events, and I really couldn't do it. I thought there's too many things happening at the same time. I don't have the skills to put that into one smooth narrative. I have this guy's story and that guy's story and the tanker story and the grunt story and the Amtracker story. I'm going to let them tell the story. It's too much for me. Going on a sidetrack, years ago when I was working on the monograph Marines in the Spanish-American War, I was researching that. Tiny little war took place over a couple of months, and even telling the Marine story of it, I couldn't do it chronologically. I had to say, okay, I'm talking about what happened in Cuba now. I'm talking about what happened in the Philippines now. I'm talking what happened in Puerto Rico now, because if I tried to tell it chronologically, you'd lose the thread.
Yeah.
All right, wait, we're here. Wait, why are we here now? Why do we go there? But just the same thing with this. It just let me put the stories of the Marines out there, and as you're reading it, you can put these stories together and realize the big picture. And
I was thinking about that. The tanker gunnery sergeant who had to, was providing logistic support and things throughout the battle space when he had all of his platoons, or there was a company gunny,
Right.
all the platoons all scattered throughout. And, he's literally driving through these things. And you read another story like, hey, didn't that gunny just drive through that guy's or
Right,
battle space?
Yeah, like for instance, in that one interview with Lieutenant Adams, who was the company commander of the tankers, he said he had 100 Marines, and he said 60 of them are support Marines, and he's got platoons all over Iraq, some kilometers away, and he's got to support all of that. And so, yeah, that company gunny, he's doing all of this somehow. He's supporting guys in Al-Assad. He's supporting guys in Fallujah. He's supporting guys out on the border with Syria. They're all his guys.
Yeah,
and the distances that they had to overcome and keeping those vehicles running, and that was true for any vehicle. The Amtraks, the LAVs, they were all over the place. It wasn't a linear battlefield by any means.
Yeah. We had before we had sort of inundated ourselves with MRAPs and all of these, more survivable vehicles. It was amazing, sort of the, it's similar by hook or by crook. All of these, a lot of, especially the mechanized units, would have to transport there in a wheeled vehicle,
right?
Maybe operate for a week or two, and then get your actual TO weapon. So very cool.
The tankers weren't even expected to be in their tanks when they went over there. They were trained as infantry, and they were going to be convoy security. And then about 2 weeks after they got to Fallujah, like, oh, here's your tanks, go be tankers.
Yeah, it's like,
and they did,
really? Are you
Yeah.
serious?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what
You know,
about
another,
what? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just going to say another interesting thing. I might have mentioned this in our first interview is when I've given talks to people and I've shown some of the pictures of the Marines that I met, and people would say, you know, they're so young. They're so young. And yeah, they're 18, 19 years old. They're guys. He's a squad leader.
Yeah.
He's in charge of 10 or 12 Marines, and sergeant, he might be 20 or 21, because I think regular civilians have this view that, oh, yeah, Clint Eastwood was the gunnery sergeant in Heartbreak Ridge.
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood was like 20 years too old to be that gunnery sergeant. You know, he was in his 50s. A gunnery sergeant would be 35.
Yeah.
The lieutenant's going to be 23. Captain's going to be 26 or 27, or major. People don't realize how young these people are, and the decisions they make, and the maturity that they have to do these things. And another thing I talk about sometimes when I give my talks is, you know, some of these guys do their 4 years and they get out, they'll never have this kind of responsibility again. And I don't call it post-traumatic stress, but it's post-traumatic adjustment, where, you know, when you're a corporal and you're in charge of a squad, every day, every decision you make is important. You get out after 4 years, you're 22 years old, and you're just a guy working at a job, and you're just doing everyday normal things, and you don't have that responsibility, you don't have that worry, but it's still like it has to be a letdown, especially for the younger guys that, you know, they were living on the edge and they were making these decisions, and, you know, being up hours at night making up a preparation for an op order, or a patrol order, and then that's gone. um,
Mhm.
so I don't always see it so much as, oh, these guys are reacting to being in combat. It was, they're reacting to not being in combat. Um, Life is just life now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost intoxicating in hindsight. At the
In
time, you know,
hindsight.
you're so in the trenches, quite literally, for some, that you don't really see it. But yeah, when, because it's and we've talked about this on other podcasts of dealing with, you know, mental health and stuff, but it's that sense of purpose.
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
it's palatable when
Right.
you're in country, because, like you said, like, everything hangs on, you know, the decision that I make, whether it's in preparation for a patrol order, or
Mhm,
your, you know, actions during that patrol, and then even,
mhm,
you know, how you bed down, and how you allow the Marines to rest and recover,
mhm,
knowing that they're going to be going out again probably in the next 4 to 6 hours. So
mhm, mhm,
um, yeah. Well, on that note, then, like, what are some of the stories then that stand out to you? I know we've mentioned a few,
mhm.
but, you know, because you really do span the gamut on who you were talking to with this, from your, you know, PFCs all the way up to a brigadier general. Um,
Right.
which ones stand out most to you?
Well, at the beginning of the book, it's Lieutenant Benjamin Adams, who was a tank platoon commander, and he's the guy that almost blew up the Marines in the building in Fallujah. Um, 2 years ago, I was reading Marine Corps Times online, and I was reading about the last Marine tank battalion that was being um, disbanded. And I looked at the name, and it was Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Adams. And I thought, wow, that's got to be the same guy. So um, oh no, okay,
I gotcha.
almost lost the network there. You still there?
Yep, still here, sir.
Okay. Um, I printed out his interview, the interview that I did with him, and sent it to him. And about a week later, I got an email from him, and he thanked me for the interview. And he said he was every everything had been closed down, the books that were closed. He was on his way to the Army War College for his professional education. He's got to the gate of 29 Palms, and at the gate, the guard said, "Sir, there's an email, or there's a package for you back at base postal." So he turned around, went back, and picked up. It was the package that I had sent. It's about 20
Oh,
pages of the interview. Yeah, and he was so glad to get that, to see that the story was being told. And I said, you know, I'm working on getting a book published right now, and hopefully he's got a hold of the book. Um, Another story from the first book, I may have mentioned this, is shortly after it came out, I got a message from a Marine who was interviewed. It was a 1.5 page interview. It not very detailed, but the interview said simply, "Sir, thank you for telling my story." And that's kind of my goal here. some other stories. The couple of the helicopter people that I met with. One was a Captain Meyer, who had been involved in the initial invasion in 2003. And in his interview, he said, "I never thought I'd be back here again, flying missions like this again." And he described how his his Cobra helicopter, the rotor blade was hit by an RPG round. And people said, "An RPG round in a helicopter?" I said, "Yeah, one of the techniques that the insurgents were using. Aircraft would come over, they just fire a bunch of RPGs at it and maybe get lucky." And with him, the rotor hit the RPG round, broke the round in half, exploded above the helicopter, but didn't disable it. But he was able to get it back to Camp Fallujah. And he got back in. He got back to, I guess it was Camp LtCol. And as soon as he got back in, they said, "Well, we're down a co-pilot. We might have another mission for you." That night. He said the mission was canceled, but it was that kind of a thing where you're up there, you're getting shot at, you almost crash, and then a couple hours later, they're telling you to get ready to go up and do another, go back into the fight again.
Yeah.
Another interesting helicopter story was I guess it was a staff sergeant was talking about they were flying over a convoy, and they didn't get the radio frequencies right. The convoy didn't have the radio frequencies, so the helicopters could not talk to the convoy commander. And this staff sergeant got a piece of cardboard from an MRE, wrote down the radio frequency, put it into an empty water bottle, dropped it out of his helicopter in front of the convoy. The convoy stopped, looked at the water bottle, and then they were able to communicate with him. Because he's going to tell them, "Hey, up ahead there's something bad," or "This area is clear." Just some stories like that, just the unexpected things with that. And the infantry stories are just amazing. The more I sat there and listened to them, the one was I forget his name now, but he was on the cover of Time magazine. It was a corporal or lance corporal from Bravo 15, and doing the interview, listening to his stories, and then at the end of the interview, this was in a little camp called Camp Shahabi. At the end of the warehouse where we were, there was these 3 or 4 explosions. I looked at him and said, "What's going on?" He just looked at me and said, "Sir, you better put your flak and helmet on." That's mortar fire. And it was like it was a day at the office. It was, maybe 100 feet from where I was sitting. These mortar rounds were hitting right outside the warehouse. And he said, "We have guys out in town right now. They're probably chasing after those guys who shot the mortars." There were situations like that where it's just, okay, it's another day at the office, and I'm falling out of my pants. Just we were 100 feet away from getting hit by mortars. And then a couple of the Marines, there was a sergeant and a corporal who were in the Amtraks that were in that big incident that day in the middle of April in Fallujah. Just their operations. And one more story. It was I forget who it was, but it was a corporal. I call it the ice cream cones in the attack. They were, again, Bravo Company 15. They were on a mission in the middle of April in Fallujah. And they'd broken into a warehouse, and it turned out it was an ice cream factory. And the guys inside, once they figured out that these were just regular civilians, they offered them ice cream, and they didn't want to take anything. But the corpsmen tasted it and said, "Yeah, it's good." So they started eating the ice cream cones, and then firefights started taking place outside the warehouse. And they go running out of the warehouse with the ice cream cones in their mouths, because he said, "We're not going to let go of that ice cream. We haven't eaten since yesterday." I said, "This would be a great movie, having the Marines running down the street with ice cream cones sticking out of their mouths." Yeah, some of the stories are funny like that, and then some of them were just, seat of your pants. Holy crap, this guy survived this. Yeah, just so many stories, and I'm glad that the publisher decided to put it out there. The book is on sale at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. It's online also with Amazon. So I'm hoping that by things like this, more people will hear about it, and the people who know people in that book will say, "Hey, there's a book out and you're in it."
Yeah.
And your picture's in it too. That was another thing with some of the big picture books. Tells the big story, but you never see what anybody looks like.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, that's right. You get a bunch of charts, you get a bunch of sort of group photos, like, hey, here, and it's usually the higher ups, right? Like, oh, here's
Oh yeah,
Colonel so and so
in
briefing
front
his
of that big
Marines, or here's
yeah, that the 1 million map of Fallujah, or that's up of all of Iraq behind the colonel or the general,
yeah,
not the guy on the ground here.
no,
And
so good.
another thing for me was once I was able to get some charts and maps done, it actually made it clear to me what the guys were talking about when I was interviewing them, because I didn't have maps when I was there, and there were maps in rooms and stuff, but once I got a couple of maps and had somebody make up the maps for me for the book, it made it much more clear to me who I was talking to and what was going on when they were doing their thing.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Well, sir, you're working on a third book. Is that correct?
I am, yes. This time it's going to highlight the guys in the LAVs, and also some of the infantry in Ramadi. Ramadi again was one of those stories. A lot was going on in Ramadi, the provincial capital, but it was far away from Baghdad. All the civilians were near Fallujah. The civilian reporters were near Fallujah, and that got all the big play in April of 2004. But Ramadi was going on at the same time. A bigger city, and just as bloody. So
Yeah.
interviewed a couple of the 3 or 4 companies, infantry companies that were there in the spring and summer of 2004. One of the stories that's going to be in that book is there was I forget the company commander, but when they checked into this outpost at the eastern edge of Ramadi, the outgoing army guy said, "Hey, make sure on Thursday nights you have your troops inside." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, every Thursday night around 2100, they pop some mortar rounds in on us." And this company commander thought, "Well, that's kind of odd. Every Thursday, all right." So the first Thursday they were there. There were a bunch of mortar rounds hit the camp, and that was it. So he looked at it, had his guys go out and do um, a survey to see where the rounds were coming from. They looked at the path of the explosion. Okay, they're 60-millimeter rounds. They have to be coming from this area. And the next Thursday, he sent a patrol out, and they killed the guys that were shooting the mortars at them. And from that point on, there were no more mortar shoots on Thursday nights. It's just kind of the Army had done things one way, and the Marines were doing it another way. That's one of the stories in the second book, or the third book rather. And then again, some of the horrific fighting that was going on in Ramadi, which got worse as the year went on.
Sure.
And that story was completely overlooked because of Fallujah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's fascinating to see you unpack these things, especially
And the LAVs, that was interesting because they were all over the place. They were interviewed LAV guys at Camp Fallujah who were actually from Camp Lejeune, and they were attached to the LAV battalion. But most of the LAV battalion was out west of Ramadi and guarding the border areas out there. And some pretty interesting stories with those guys too. So that's book number 3 that's in the works right now. It's roughly roughed out. Let's see what the publisher thinks and more changes that I have to make to it. One thing that I am going to do with it, though, is I realized in the first 2 books, a lot of times when I was describing things, I was using Marine talk. I'd say XO, CO, OIC, COC. And then I realized, well, unless I'm quoting somebody, I better use words that people will understand, non-military people. So in the third book, I'm revising my narrative to use simple talk. And if it's quoted, then I'll use the CO, OIC, XO, and have a parentheses, have an explanation of what the terms mean. I just had a lunch with my brother-in-law this past week, and he has read both books, and he said he appreciated the glossary that I put in the book. And part of my thought process behind that was going back to my Spanish-American War research. When I was doing it, I kept thinking, I wish somebody had written this down, or I wish somebody had explained this better. So when I was interviewing Marines, and then when I was revising the books, I spent extra time with a glossary because there were terms in 2004 that I didn't know. And I had only been out of the reserves for 3 or 4 years at that point. And there are terms in the book that are from 2004. Weapons are no longer in use. And in 10 years or 20 years from now, there's going to be terms that nobody will know. But the glossary is there to explain all that. And it's a pretty extensive glossary, more so than in a lot of books that I've read about combat in Iraq at that time. And when I wrote the glossary, I tried to make it in civilian talk so that a non-military person would understand. Like, here's one, for instance, SITREP. This isn't the official military description, but I just said situation report of an ongoing action. So a civilian can read that and understand, okay, that's what a SITREP is. A snake. You and I know, okay, that's a Cobra. What's a Cobra? It's a Cobra helicopter. So in the glossary, I have snake, and then I have a nickname for a Marine Cobra helicopter. It's not official, but everybody calls them the snakes.
Sure. And then, we love to hybrid and bastardize existing acronyms and then reappropriate
Right.
them.
Oh, yeah.
So even if you already knew that acronym existed, it may not mean the same thing that you thought it did when you were using it.
Well, like HET is one that I came across. HET was Human Exploitation Team, but it's also Heavy Equipment Transporter.
Yep.
So depending on how it's used, then you can figure it out, but you still have to spell that out in the glossary so that, okay, HET means this in this case, and it means that in that case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sir, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really fascinated with your style choices, what you're doing to highlight these battles and to bring it, sort of making sure these things don't get lost in the public consciousness.
Right.
I'm really looking forward to your third installment. So.
Well, I'm appreciative of meeting with you on these talks and getting the word out this way too. So more people can read about what our Marines have done over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's really important that these things are chronicled and they're out. So the book is First Fights in Fallujah, Marines During Operation Vigilant Resolve in Iraq, April 2004. It's out on the shelves now. Lieutenant Colonel David Kelly, USMC retired. Sir, thank you so much for being here, and look forward to our next chat when your next book comes out.
Thanks so much, Vic. Great talking to you.
Great talking to you, sir. Have a good one.
Okay, thanks.
A common axiom is that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Another axiom is that we sweat in peace so that we don't bleed in war. Here at the Marine Corps Association, we fully understand both. That is why we offer through our professional development page on our website a comprehensive catalog of battle studies, tactical and ethical decision games, and war games to ensure that not only do we learn from the past, but we embrace the thoughts and decisions that influence the outcomes of some of the greatest actions of the Marine Corps. We have tools and techniques that will enhance both unit training as well as enable comprehensive self-study. Check out all that the Marine Corps Association has to offer on our website. Go to mca-marines.org/professional-development. That's mca-marines.org/professional-development. And get your reps and sets in.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am William Truding, but you've also heard the voices or contributions of Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Lichman, or Ty Frazier. The opinions expressed in this episode do not reflect the official stance of the Marine Corps, DoD, or Marine Corps Association.